The great chamber of the Dragon Council sat in heavy silence. 12 massive dragons, each representing a different world in the Athenian Empire, gathered around a circular table carved from a single piece of ancient stone. The seat at the head of the table stood empty. It had been empty for 3 months now, ever since Emperor Grates had died suddenly in his sleep. The problem wasn't just that they had lost their leader. The real crisis was that Grates had died without naming an heir. No successor. No designated replacement. And for the first time in 5,000 years of dragon civilization, there was no one left in the traditional bloodlines who could claim the throne. The wars of the previous century had been brutal. House after house of the old royal families had been wiped out in the conflicts. The few survivors had scattered across the empire, and none of them had the support or legitimacy needed to rule. The empire that stretched across 4 to 7 star systems was now leaderless, and every day that passed without a clear successor made things worse. Trade disputes were escalating into armed conflicts. Regional governors were starting to ignore council directives. Some worlds were even talking quietly about independence. The dragons had built their entire civilization on a strict hierarchy with the emperor at the top. Without that central authority, everything was starting to crumble. High Counselor Malthor, an ancient blue dragon whose scales had faded to almost silver with age, stood before the council with a proposal that many considered desperate, possibly even insane. "We must use the Oracle Stone," he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. The reaction was immediate. Several councillors hissed in disbelief. One actually laughed out loud. The Oracle Stone was a legend, a relic from the founding days of their empire. According to the old stories, it had been used by the very first dragons to identify leaders when no clear choice existed. But that was over 2,000 years ago. No one alive had ever seen it used. Most dragons weren't even sure it actually worked. "The Oracle Stone is a myth," Councillor Virex said bluntly. She was a red dragon known for her practical thinking and low tolerance for what she called mystical nonsense. "A piece of crystal that supposedly glows when pointed at someone with leadership potential? It's a fairy tale we tell hatchlings." "It's all we have left," Malthor replied calmly. "We've spent 3 months searching for a legitimate heir through traditional channels. We've found no one. Our laws are clear. When the bloodlines fail, we must seek the one who carries the mark of leadership. The Oracle Stone was designed for exactly this purpose." "And what if it doesn't work?" another counselor asked. "What if we perform this ancient ritual and nothing happens? We'll look like fools, and the Empire will lose what little faith it still has in us." Malthor's eyes swept across the gathered dragons. "And if we do nothing? If we continue to drift without leadership until the Empire tears itself apart? That is certain failure. The Oracle Stone is uncertain. But uncertain hope is better than certain destruction." The debate lasted for hours, but in the end, desperation won. The council voted to attempt the ritual. If nothing else, it would show the Empire that they were trying everything possible to find a solution. The Oracle Stone was kept in the deepest vault beneath the council chamber. It took 6 dragons working together to move the security barriers that protected it. When they finally reached it, even the skeptics felt something. The stone was larger than anyone had expected, about the size of a dragon's head, and it seemed to pulse with a faint internal light even when dormant. Ancient instructions, carved into the walls of the vault in a dialect of dragon language so old that only scholars could read it, explained the ritual. The stone had to be brought to the Hall of Voices, where the acoustics were perfect. Each counselor would speak the words of seeking in sequence. If the stone recognized true leadership potential anywhere in the known universe, it would activate and point the way. The ritual took place at midnight, more out of tradition than necessity. The 12 counselors formed a circle around the Oracle Stone, each taking their turn to speak the ancient words. Their voices rose and fell in a pattern that hadn't been heard in millennia, echoing off the crystalline walls of the Hall of Voices. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Virex shot Malthor a look that clearly said, "I told you so." Several other counselors were already preparing their arguments for what they should try next. Then the stone began to glow. It started as a faint pulse of light deep within the crystal, barely visible. But it grew brighter with each passing second until the entire stone was blazing with energy that hadn't stirred in 2,000 years. The light shot upward, forming a beam that pierced through the ceiling as if the solid stone wasn't even there. The beam stretched out into space, visible even in the darkness, pointing like an arrow toward something far away. The dragon stood frozen in shock. It had actually worked. The Oracle Stone was real, and it was showing them the way to their next emperor. Scholar Torin, the youngest member of the council and an expert in stellar navigation, immediately began taking readings. He tracked the direction of the beam, calculating coordinates and cross-referencing them with star charts. After several minutes of frantic work, he looked up with confusion written across his features. "It's pointing to a planet in the outer rim," he said slowly. "A small world, barely classified. According to our records, it's inhabited by a primitive species that hasn't even achieved faster-than-light travel yet. They call their planet Earth." The confusion in the chamber was palpable. Earth? The Oracle Stone, which was supposed to identify the greatest leadership potential in the universe, was pointing them toward a backwater world that most dragons had never even heard of? "There must be an error," Virex insisted. "Perhaps the stone is malfunctioning after all this time." But Malthor was staring at the beam of light with wonder in his ancient eyes. "The Oracle Stone doesn't malfunction. It shows us what we need, not what we expect. If it points to Earth, then Earth is where we must go." The Council authorized an expedition immediately. A small diplomatic ship, equipped with translation technology and cultural databases, would travel to Earth. They would follow the Oracle Stone's guidance and find whoever or whatever it was pointing toward. The stone would be brought along to help narrow down the search once they arrived. 3 days later, the Dragon ship entered Earth's orbit. The Oracle Stone's beam had narrowed during the journey, pointing now to a specific region on the planet's surface. The Pacific Northwest of the North American continent. The Dragons descended under cover of darkness, their ship's stealth systems hiding them from Earth's primitive detection technology. On the ground, they activated the Oracle Stone again, expecting it to lead them to some great human leader. Perhaps a president or military general. Maybe a brilliant scientist or influential teacher. Someone who, even among a primitive species, showed extraordinary potential for leadership. Instead, the stone led them to a rundown group home on the outskirts of a small town called Millbrook. The building was old, its paint peeling, surrounded by a chain-link fence that had seen better days. This was a foster care facility, a place where human children without families were housed temporarily. And the Oracle Stone, glowing with absolute certainty, pointed directly at a window on the second floor. Inside that room, barely visible in the dim light, a 12-year-old human boy sat on a bed reading a book. His name was Tyler Brooks, and according to the Oracle Stone, an artifact that had guided dragon civilization for thousands of years, he was destined to be their next emperor. The dragons stared at the building in complete disbelief. This was impossible. This was wrong. This had to be some kind of mistake. But the Oracle Stone had never been wrong before. Not once in its entire recorded history. High Counselor Malthor looked at his fellow council members and said the words they were all thinking but none wanted to speak aloud. "We need to talk to that boy." Tyler Brooks had lived in 7 different foster homes in the last 4 years. He had learned some important lessons during that time. The first lesson was that adults rarely said what they actually meant. The second was that if you paid close attention to how people acted, not just what they said, you could usually figure out what they really wanted. The third lesson was the most important: adapt or suffer. So when he woke up at 2 in the morning to find 3 massive alien dragons standing in his room, their scales gleaming in the moonlight streaming through his window, Tyler didn't scream. He didn't cry or beg or try to run. He sat up slowly, pulled his blanket around his shoulders, and looked at them with careful, measuring eyes. "You're real," he said quietly. "It wasn't a question. I thought I was dreaming, but dreams don't have this much detail." The largest dragon, whose scales were faded blue that looked almost silver, tilted his massive head to one side. "You are not afraid, young human?" Tyler considered the question honestly. "I'm terrified. But screaming won't help, and running won't work because you're between me and the door. So I'm choosing to stay calm and see what you want." High Counselor Malthor felt something shift in his perception. Most species, when confronted with dragons for the first time, reacted with pure instinct. Fight or flight. This child was doing neither. He was thinking, analyzing, choosing his response based on logic rather than emotion. It was unusual, especially for someone so young. "We need to talk to you about something important," Malthor said, lowering himself closer to the boy's level. "Will you come with us? We promise you will not be harmed." Tyler looked at each of the 3 dragons in turn, studying their body language. The big silver-blue one seemed genuine, his posture open and non-threatening. The red dragon to his left looked impatient, her tail twitching with barely contained frustration. The smaller green dragon in the back seemed nervous, his claws flexing against the worn carpet. "Do I have a choice?" Tyler asked. "Yes," Malthor said. "We will not force you. But we have traveled very far to find you, and what we have to discuss affects not just you, but billions of lives across many worlds. Tyler pulled his blanket tighter. He thought about Mrs. Chen, the group home supervisor, asleep downstairs. He thought about his roommate Danny, who had finally stopped crying himself to sleep every night. He thought about the math test he had on Friday. Then he looked at the dragons again and realized that whatever normal life he thought he had was already over. These beings had found him for a reason, and pretending they didn't exist wouldn't make them go away. "Okay," he said. "But I'm leaving a note for Mrs. Chen so she doesn't think I ran away again. She worries." The dragons waited while Tyler wrote a brief note explaining that he had gone somewhere safe and would try to come back soon. He left it on his pillow, put on his shoes and jacket, and followed the dragons out through his window to a ship that looked like something from a science fiction movie. The interior of the dragon ship was enormous, built to accommodate beings much larger than humans. Tyler felt tiny as he walked down corridors that were more like aircraft hangars. The dragons brought him to a circular room with a viewing screen that showed Earth falling away behind them as they climbed toward orbit. "We're leaving the planet?" Tyler asked, his voice catching slightly despite his efforts to stay calm. "Only temporarily," Malthor assured him. "Our council chamber is in orbit. We need to conduct some evaluations, and then you will be returned home safely. You have my word." Over the next 3 hours, Tyler was subjected to a series of tests that the dragons clearly expected him to fail. They put him in a combat simulator where holographic opponents attacked him. He lasted about 30 seconds before being killed. They gave him complex political scenarios and asked him to make decisions. His answers were hesitant and unsure, nothing like the confident pronouncements of a natural leader. They tested his physical strength, his reflexes, his memory, and his problem-solving abilities. In every single test, by dragon standards, Tyler was completely average. Actually, he was below average because he was human, smaller and weaker and slower than even the weakest dragon. Counselor Virex, the red dragon who had been skeptical from the beginning, made no effort to hide her frustration. "This is absurd. The Oracle Stone has clearly malfunctioned. This child has no exceptional qualities whatsoever. He cannot fight. He has no authority. He knows nothing about leadership or governance. We've wasted 3 days on this fool's errand." Tyler, sitting in a chair designed for beings 3 times his size, heard every word. He should have felt insulted or hurt, but he had been called worse things by adults who were supposed to care about him. Instead, he found himself studying Virex with the same careful attention he gave to every new foster parent or social worker. "You're angry," Tyler said quietly. Virex's head snapped toward him. "What?" "You're angry, but not at me. You're angry because you're scared. The Empire is falling apart, and you don't know how to fix it. The Oracle Stone was supposed to give you an answer, and instead it brought you to a random kid on a backwater planet. Now you're scared that maybe there is no answer, that your whole civilization might just collapse, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." The room went silent. Every dragon turned to look at Tyler with new attention. How had this human child, who had failed every test they gave him, just read Virex's emotional state more accurately than her own colleagues had in decades of service together? Virex opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her tail, which had been lashing back and forth with agitation, went still. That's not. "It's okay to be scared," Tyler continued. "I'm scared all the time. When I got moved to my 4th foster home, I was so scared I couldn't eat for 3 days. But being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you care about what happens next." Scholar Torin, the young green dragon, leaned forward. "How did you know that? About Counselor Virex?" Tyler shrugged. "I just watched her. The way she moves her tail when she's frustrated versus when she's actually angry. The way her voice gets louder when she's trying to convince herself of something. The way she keeps looking at Counselor Malthor like she's hoping he has an answer she doesn't." He turned to look at Torin. "Like how you organize your data tablets in a straight line and adjust them every few minutes to make sure they're perfectly aligned. That's not about being neat. That's about needing control over something when everything else feels chaotic." Torin's eyes widened. He looked down at the data tablets in front of him, arranged in a precise row that he had been adjusting unconsciously throughout the entire evaluation. I didn't realize I was doing that." Tyler's gaze moved to a younger dragon named Lissa who had been standing quietly in the corner, taking notes. "And you're left-handed, but you're forcing yourself to write with your right hand because someone told you it was the proper way. Your handwriting is messy because it's not natural for you, and you keep flexing your left claws like they're frustrated they're not being used." Lissa dropped her stylus. It clattered on the metal floor, and she stared at Tyler like he had just performed magic. How? No one has ever noticed that. I've been hiding it since I was a hatchling. Left-handedness is considered improper in formal dragon society. That's stupid, Tyler said bluntly. Your brain is wired to use your left hand. Fighting against it just makes everything harder for no reason. High Counselor Malthor sat back on his haunches, his ancient eyes studying this human boy with growing fascination. The child had failed every traditional test of leadership they had given him. He couldn't fight. He had no political knowledge. He possessed no obvious power or authority. But he had something the dragons had lost somewhere in their thousands of years of rigid hierarchy and formal traditions. He could see people. Really see them. Not as positions or ranks or functions, but as individuals with fears and needs and struggles they couldn't always express. Tell me, Tyler Brooks, Malthor said slowly, in your foster care system, you have moved between many homes. Why do you think that is? Tyler's face showed pain for the first time since they had met him. Because I don't fit. I ask too many questions. I notice things that make adults uncomfortable. I don't follow rules that don't make sense just because someone says I should. So they move me to a new home and hope the next family can fix me. And has any family succeeded in fixing you? No, Tyler said quietly. Because I'm not broken. I'm just different. But most people can't tell the difference between different and wrong. Malthor felt something click into place in his mind. The Oracle Stone hadn't brought them to Earth by mistake. It had brought them to someone who understood something fundamental that the dragons had forgotten. Someone who could see past surface appearances to the truth underneath. Someone who had been rejected by his own society not despite his gifts, but because of them. I think, Malthor said slowly, we need to change what we're evaluating. Tyler Brooks, you have failed every test we've given you today. But perhaps we've been giving you the wrong tests. Virex started to protest, but Malthor raised a claw for silence. For the next 3 days, young human, I want to try something different. I don't want to test you. I want you to observe us. Watch the council as we work. Notice what you notice. And then tell us what you see. Tyler looked confused. That's it? You just want me to watch and take notes? I want you to do what you've been doing your whole life, Malthor said. I want you to see us. Really see us. The way you saw Virex's fear, and Taurin's need for control, and Lyssa's hidden left-handedness. I want you to look at our council, our empire, our civilization, and tell us what we're too close to see ourselves. Why would you want that? Tyler asked. Because, Malthor said, and his voice carried the weight of his many centuries of life, sometimes the most valuable perspective comes from someone who doesn't belong. Someone who can see the system from the outside. You have been an outsider your entire life, Tyler Brooks. Perhaps that is exactly what we need. After 3 days of observation, Tyler had given the Dragon Council a report that made several of them deeply uncomfortable. He had pointed out how their rigid hierarchy created bottlenecks in decision-making. He had noticed how younger dragons were afraid to speak up even when they had good ideas. He had identified patterns of communication breakdown between different departments. Some counselors found his observations insightful. Others found them insulting. Counselor Virex stood before the assembly and made her position clear. The boy is observant, I'll grant you that. But observation is not leadership. We cannot hand our empire to a child based on a glowing rock and some clever comments about our behavior. If we are seriously considering this human as a potential heir, he must prove himself through our traditions. Malthor knew this was coming. You want him to undergo the 3 trials. Yes, Virex said firmly. The 3 trials of leadership have been used for millennia to test those who seek to rule. If this human is truly chosen by the Oracle Stone, he should be able to pass them. If he cannot, then we know the stone has made an error, and we can move on to find a real solution. The chamber filled with murmurs of agreement. Even those counselors who were impressed with Tyler felt that some formal testing was necessary. You couldn't just hand an empire to someone without proof they could handle it. Tyler sat in his oversized chair and listened to them debate his fate. The 3 trials sounded important, and from the way the dragons talked about them, they were clearly designed to be incredibly difficult. He wanted to speak up, to say that this seemed unfair, but he had learned in foster care that sometimes you just had to accept the tests life threw at you, fair or not. Malthor finally turned to him. Tyler Brooks, the council has decided you must undergo the 3 trials of leadership. These are ancient tests designed to prove worthiness to rule. They will be extremely difficult, even for a dragon. For a human child, they may be impossible. But if you succeed, no one can question your right to be considered as heir. Do you accept this challenge? Tyler took a deep breath. Do I have a choice? You can always choose to return to Earth, Malthor said gently. No one will think less of you. These trials were not designed for humans. Tyler thought about going back to the group home, back to moving between foster families, back to being told he didn't fit. Then he thought about everything he had seen in the past few days. An entire civilization of brilliant beings who were struggling because their systems had become too rigid. Young dragons who had ideas but were too afraid to share them. Leaders who were so caught up in tradition that they couldn't see obvious solutions to their problems. Maybe he couldn't be their emperor. Maybe that was ridiculous. But maybe he could help them see things differently. Maybe that was worth trying, even if the trials were impossible. I'll do it, Tyler said. The first trial was scheduled for the next morning. It was called the Trial of Combat Prowess, and it had been used for thousands of years to ensure that leaders could defend their people. Traditionally, candidates would face a series of increasingly difficult opponents in physical combat, proving their strength and warrior skill. Tyler stood in the combat arena, looking at the simulation equipment with growing dread. The arena was massive, designed for dragons who could breathe fire and fly and fight with claws and teeth. He was a 12-year-old human who had never been in a real fight in his life. The trial administrator, a scarred old dragon named Krell, explained the scenario. You will face a simulated attack on a civilian settlement. Enemy forces are approaching. Your goal is to defeat them and protect the civilians. The simulation will measure your combat effectiveness, tactical decisions, and victory conditions. When you say defeat them, Tyler asked, his voice small in the huge arena, you mean I have to fight? Physically? That is traditionally how combat works, yes, Krell said with barely concealed amusement. Several dragons in the observation gallery chuckled. Tyler stared at the simulation controls. He was going to fail. There was no question about it. A human child couldn't defeat dragon warriors, even simulated ones. He would lose in seconds, probably look ridiculous doing it, and then he'd be sent home. Unless. Can I ask a question? Tyler said. What exactly is the goal of this trial? Like, what is it actually testing? Krell looked annoyed. I just explained that. Combat prowess. The ability to defeat enemies and protect civilians. Right, but why do leaders need to be good at combat? What's the actual purpose? To protect their people, obviously, Virex called down from the observation gallery. A leader who cannot defend their citizens is useless. Tyler nodded slowly, an idea forming. So the real goal is protecting people. Not fighting. Fighting is how you protect people, Krell said impatiently. Now, are you ready to begin, or are you going to stall by asking philosophical questions? I'm ready, Tyler said. But I want to propose something. Can I interpret this trial differently? Can I focus on protecting the civilians using any method, not just combat? The dragons looked at each other, confused. Malthor leaned forward with interest. Explain what you mean. The trial is called combat prowess, but you said the goal is protecting civilians. What if I can protect more civilians by not fighting? What if there's a better way? Virex snorted. There is no better way than defeating your enemies. That's the entire point of the trial. Let him try, Malthor said. There was something in his ancient eyes, a glimmer of curiosity. The Oracle Stone chose him for a reason. Perhaps we should see what happens when we let him approach our traditions from a different angle. Krell started the simulation with obvious reluctance. The scenario loaded around Tyler. He was standing in a virtual village with about 200 civilian dragons going about their daily business. In the distance, enemy forces were approaching. According to the simulation data, the enemy would arrive in 10 minutes, and they vastly outnumbered any defensive forces the village had. The traditional approach was clear. Take command of the village defenders, set up defensive positions, and fight the enemy forces directly. Every candidate who had ever taken this trial had done some variation of that strategy. Tyler did something completely different. He ignored the weapons and defensive positions entirely. Instead, he pulled up the village map and started analyzing evacuation routes. He identified 3 paths out of the village that the approaching enemy wouldn't be able to see or block. Then he used the simulation's communication system to organize the civilians. Everyone needs to leave right now, he announced. Take only what you can carry. Group leaders will guide you through these 3 routes. Stay quiet, stay together, and move as fast as you can. In the observation gallery, dragons began murmuring in confusion. What is he doing? Someone asked. He's not even trying to fight. Tyler continued working. He positioned the small number of village defenders not to fight, but to create distractions. They made noise on the opposite side of the village from where the civilians were evacuating. They lit fires to draw attention. They made it look like the village was preparing for a desperate last stand while the actual population was silently slipping away. When the enemy forces arrived, they found a village that appeared occupied and defended. They engaged with the defenders Tyler had positioned as decoys. But the fight was brief. The defenders had orders to retreat quickly, leading the enemy on a chase that took them away from the evacuation routes. By the time the enemy realized what had happened, the entire civilian population was gone. The village was empty. There had been fighting, but it was minimal and carefully controlled. The defenders had taken almost no casualties because they weren't trying to win a battle, they were just buying time. The simulation ended. The statistics appeared on the main display. Civilian casualties, 0. Defender casualties, 3 minor injuries. Enemy defeated, technically no, but enemy objective failed. The arena was completely silent. Krell stared at the results like they had betrayed him. This is not how the trial works. You didn't defeat the enemy. You ran away. I saved everyone, Tyler said quietly. Isn't that the point? You said the goal was protecting civilians. I protected all of them. No one died. But you didn't win the battle. Virex protested from the gallery. Why do I need to win a battle if I can achieve the objective without one? Tyler asked. Look at the traditional results from past trials. The best scores had, 80% civilian survival? 90% if they were really good? My approach saved 100% because I didn't waste time and resources fighting when I could just get everyone to safety. Malthor was staring at the simulation results with something like wonder on his face. In 3,000 years of this trial, no one has ever achieved 0 civilian casualties. Not once. We've been so focused on combat prowess that we forgot the actual purpose was protection. Scholar Torin pulled up historical data, his claws moving rapidly across his tablet. He's right. The average civilian survival rate in this trial is 73%. We've been accepting that nearly a third of the people die because we assumed the only way to pass was through combat excellence. But this human just showed us that the best way to protect people might not involve fighting at all. This is ridiculous, Virex said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. You're changing the fundamental nature of the trial. No, Tyler said, and his voice was stronger now, more confident. I'm refocusing on what the trial was supposed to test in the first place. You all got so caught up in the tradition of how it's done that you forgot why it exists. Leadership isn't about being the best fighter. It's about making decisions that protect the most people. Sometimes that means fighting. Sometimes it means evacuating. The method doesn't matter as much as the result. Krell looked at the council, clearly hoping they would disqualify Tyler's approach. But Malthor was nodding slowly, and even some of the more traditional counselors looked thoughtful. The trial tested whether a leader could protect their people, Malthor finally said. Tyler Brooks protected all of them. By our own stated objective, he has passed the first trial. Tyler turned to face the full council. His hands were shaking, but his voice was clear. I've spent 2 weeks watching you all work. I've seen how your government functions. And I need to tell you something you don't want to hear. Your empire is dying, and it's not because you don't have an emperor. It's because your entire system is built on fear and hierarchy instead of trust and cooperation. The chamber went deadly silent. Tyler continued, his words coming faster now. Everyone is so busy protecting their position and following rules that no one is actually solving problems. Young dragons have brilliant ideas but are too scared to share them because they might offend someone higher ranked. Departments don't communicate because they are competing for resources. People follow orders even when those orders don't make sense because questioning authority is seen as weakness. You've built a civilization where everyone is so focused on the hierarchy that they've forgotten they're supposed to be working together. This is outrageous, someone muttered, but Tyler kept going. And these trials? They're testing for all the wrong things. Combat prowess, legal judgment, political manipulation, those aren't what make a good leader. They're what made good leaders during your wars. But you're not at war anymore. You need different skills now. You need people who can listen, who can see problems from new angles, who can bring people together instead of dominating them. Counselor Virex's voice was cold. So you believe you know better than 3,000 years of dragon tradition? No, Tyler said. I just know that what worked before isn't working anymore. I can see it because I'm an outsider. You can't see it because you're too close to it. But look at your empire. Really look at it. It's falling apart. And passing these trials won't fix that because the trials are part of the problem. The council erupted in angry debate. Half the dragons were calling for Tyler to be sent back to Earth immediately. The other half were arguing that he had a point, even if he had delivered it rudely. It was Scholar Torin who finally cut through the noise. Everyone stop. His young voice carried an urgency that made even the senior counselors pause. I found something in the ancient texts. Something about the Oracle Stone prophecy that changes everything. Torin projected an image of ancient dragon script onto the main display. We've been translating this phrase as the one who carries the mark of leadership. But I've been studying the oldest dialects, and I think we got it wrong. The original language is more nuanced than that. He highlighted specific symbols. This word we translated as mark can also mean method or manner. And this word for leadership in the ancient dialect wasn't about authority or command. It was closer to guiding or showing the way. A better translation would be, the one who carries the method of guiding. Malthor leaned forward. What are you saying? The prophecy wasn't about finding someone with inherent authority, Torin said, his voice shaking with excitement. It was about finding someone who understood a different way of leading. A different method. He pulled up more texts, pages of ancient dragon history that most counselors had never seen. I've been researching our oldest records. The original Dragon Empire, before the wars, was completely different from what we have now. Leaders were chosen for their ability to listen and collaborate. Decisions were made through consensus. The hierarchy existed, but it was flexible and focused on expertise rather than rigid authority. Images appeared on the screen showing ancient dragon gatherings that looked nothing like the formal, rigid council sessions of today. Dragons of all ages sitting in circles, discussing and debating freely. Young dragons speaking alongside elders. Decisions being made through conversation rather than decree. Then came the wars, Torin continued. Centuries of conflict with other species, with each other, with countless enemies. The gentle, collaborative approach didn't work in wartime. We needed clear chains of command, instant obedience, warriors who could fight and leaders who could command. So we changed. We became harder, more rigid, more hierarchical. And we won our wars. But we never changed back, Malthor said softly, understanding dawning in his ancient eyes. Exactly, Torin said. The wars ended, but we kept the wartime culture. We've been running a peacetime empire with wartime values for over 1,000 years. And it's destroying us from the inside. The Oracle Stone wasn't looking for someone who could perpetuate our current system. It was looking for someone who could help us remember what we used to be. Tyler stood very still, listening to all of this with growing understanding. The Oracle Stone hadn't chosen him because he was special or powerful. It had chosen him because he represented something the dragons had lost. Malthor rose from his seat and walked slowly toward Tyler. The ancient dragon looked tired, but also relieved, as if a weight he had been carrying for years was finally lifting. My entire life, Malthor said quietly, I have felt that something was wrong with our civilization. That we were missing something essential. But I could never articulate what it was. I thought perhaps I was simply old and nostalgic for a past that never truly existed. He looked at the historical images Torin had displayed. But it did exist. We were once different. We were once gentler. And somehow, over centuries, we forgot how to be that way. We forgot that strength can be quiet, that leadership can be collaborative, that the goal is not to dominate but to serve. He turned back to Tyler. This human child has failed all our trials by our current standards. But he has passed them all by the standards of who we used to be, who we were meant to be. He protects without fighting. He solves problems by understanding needs rather than enforcing rules. And he has the courage to tell us uncomfortable truths even when it would be easier to play along with our expectations. So what are you saying? Virex asked, though her voice had lost its hostile edge. I'm saying the Oracle Stone was right, Malthor said. Not because Tyler Brooks should be our emperor. But because he can teach us how to be better than we are. He carries the method we lost. And if we're wise, we'll learn from him before our empire collapses under the weight of its own rigidity. Tyler felt overwhelmed. I don't know how to fix your empire. I'm just a kid who's been bounced around foster homes because I don't fit anywhere. Perhaps that's exactly why you can help us, Malthor said. You understand what it's like when systems break people who don't fit their molds. You've lived it. And now you have a chance to help build systems that work for everyone, not just those who conform perfectly. The council chamber was silent, each dragon processing what they had learned. Their entire understanding of their history, their culture, and their future had shifted in the span of a single conversation. So what happens now? Tyler asked quietly. Malthor looked at his fellow counselors. Now we make a choice. Do we cling to what we've become? Or do we have the courage to remember what we once were and could be again? The vote was supposed to happen in 3 days. The Dragon Council would decide whether to adopt Tyler's recommendations and begin transforming their empire, or reject his ideas and continue searching for a traditional heir. But the hardline traditionalists weren't willing to wait for a vote they knew they might lose. General Craven led the rebellion. He was an old warrior dragon, his scales scarred from 100 battles, his mind shaped by decades of military command. To him, the very idea of changing the empire based on the observations of a human child was an insult to everything dragons had built over thousands of years. The coup began at midnight. Craven's forces seized the main communication hub, the military command center, and the power stations that supplied energy to the orbital council chamber. His message was broadcast across all dragon military channels. The council has been corrupted by alien influence. We are restoring traditional dragon authority. All loyal citizens will stand down and await proper leadership. Tyler woke to alarms blaring and red emergency lights flashing throughout the council ship. Malthor rushed to his quarters, moving faster than Tyler had ever seen the ancient dragon move. We're under attack, Malthor said. Traditionalist forces have taken control of key systems. They're demanding the council surrender you and abandon the reforms. Tyler felt his stomach drop. This is my fault. They're doing this because of me. No, Malthor said firmly. They're doing this because they're afraid of change. That fear existed long before you arrived. You simply forced them to confront it. The council gathered in an emergency session. Half their systems were offline. Craven's forces controlled most of the orbital defense platforms. Several counselors argued for giving Tyler up to prevent bloodshed. Others wanted to fight back using loyalist military forces. Tyler sat in his oversized chair, listening to them debate his fate and the future of their empire. He felt small and helpless, just like he had felt so many times in foster care when adults made decisions about his life without really listening to what he needed or wanted. Then Scholar Torin said something that changed everything. We still have access to the civilian communication network. Craven seized the military channels, but he didn't think the civilian systems mattered. We could broadcast to the entire empire if we wanted to. Councillor Virex shook her head. And say what? Beg the population to support us? They're not soldiers. They can't fight Craven's forces. They don't need to fight, Tyler said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. They just need to choose. Maltha's eyes lit up with understanding. You want to speak to them. Directly. Yes, Tyler said, standing up in his chair so he could see everyone better. General Craven thinks this is about military power. He's thinking like a warrior because that's how he was trained. But this isn't a military problem. It's about what kind of civilization you want to be. That's not a decision generals should make. That's a decision everyone should make. A 12-year-old human is going to lecture our entire civilization about their future. Virex asked, but there was no mockery in her voice. She sounded genuinely curious about how this would work. I'm going to tell them my story, Tyler said. And let them decide if they want their empire to be the kind of place where people like me can belong, or the kind of place that only works if everyone fits perfectly into predetermined roles. 2 hours later, Tyler sat in front of a camera with every communication screen in the Dragon Empire receiving his broadcast. 47 star systems. Billions of dragons. All of them watching this small human boy who had somehow become the center of their civilization's greatest crisis. Tyler was terrified. His hands shook. His voice cracked when he started speaking. But he told his story anyway. My name is Tyler Brooks. I'm 12 years old, and I'm from a planet called Earth. Before the Dragon Council found me, I lived in something called foster care. That's a system where kids who don't have families get moved around between different homes, hoping someone will want to keep them permanently. He paused, gathering his courage. I was in 7 different homes in 4 years. Not because I was bad or stupid or broken. I was moved because I didn't fit. I asked too many questions. I noticed things that made adults uncomfortable. I didn't follow rules that didn't make sense just because someone told me to. So each family would give up on me and send me somewhere else, hoping the next place could fix whatever was wrong with me. Tyler's voice grew stronger. But nothing was wrong with me. I was just different. And the system I was in couldn't tell the difference between different and defective. Every time I failed to fit into someone's expectations, they saw it as my failure. Never as a failure of the system itself. On planets across the Empire, dragons who had been watching casually began to pay closer attention. Some of them recognized something in Tyler's story. The feeling of not quite fitting. Of being told they were wrong for being themselves. The Dragon Council brought me here because of something called the Oracle Stone. It pointed to me, and they didn't understand why. I didn't understand either. I failed all your traditional tests. I can't fight. I don't know your laws. I'm terrible at political games. By every measure you use to judge leadership, I should have been sent home immediately. Tyler leaned forward. But here's what I realized. The Oracle Stone wasn't wrong. It just saw something different than what you were looking for. It saw that your empire is making the same mistake my foster care system made. You've built structures that only work for people who fit perfectly. And everyone who doesn't fit gets labeled as defective, weak, or broken. The broadcast showed footage from the past 2 weeks. Dragons working in the council chamber. The rigid hierarchies. The young dragons too afraid to speak. The brilliant ideas that went unshared because speaking out of turn was improper. I've watched you all, Tyler continued. I've seen dragons with amazing talent struggle because they don't fit your expectations of what a dragon should be. I've seen young people with revolutionary ideas stay silent because the hierarchy doesn't allow them to speak. I've seen your civilization choose conformity over innovation, tradition over progress, hierarchy over effectiveness. He took a deep breath. And I've seen what it costs you. Your empire is falling apart. Not because you lack strong leaders. But because your definition of strength is too narrow. You've spent so long being warriors that you forgot how to be anything else. And now that you're not at war anymore, the warrior mindset is destroying you from the inside. On dozens of worlds, young dragons were recording Tyler's speech, sharing it, discussing it. Older dragons were remembering times they had bitten back opinions, suppressed their true selves, conformed to expectations that felt wrong. The message was spreading faster than General Craven could possibly contain it. Right now, there's a general named Craven who's trying to overthrow your council because he thinks I'm corrupting your civilization, Tyler said. He thinks the problem is me, this weird human kid who doesn't follow your rules. But I'm not the problem. The rules are the problem. The system that breaks anyone who doesn't fit perfectly is the problem. Tyler stood up, his small frame somehow commanding attention across billions of screens. General Craven wants you to choose between the old ways and change. He thinks you'll choose tradition because it's safe and familiar. But I'm asking you to choose something different. Not me as your emperor, I don't want that and I'm not qualified for it. I'm asking you to choose the kind of empire where everyone can contribute. Where different perspectives are valued, not suppressed. Where strength is measured by how you solve problems, not how well you follow ancient protocols. His voice dropped, becoming quieter but somehow more powerful. I'm asking you to build the kind of civilization where a kid like me could belong. Not by changing who I am to fit your expectations, but by having systems flexible enough to let me contribute in my own way. Because if your empire has room for someone as different as me, then it has room for all the dragons who don't quite fit either. And there are more of them than you think. The broadcast ended. Tyler sat back, exhausted and uncertain. He had no idea if his words would make any difference at all. But across the empire, something remarkable was happening. On the industrial world of Kelthax, young engineer dragons walked out of factories where their innovative designs had been rejected by traditionalist supervisors. On the agricultural world of Vina, farmers who had been proposing more efficient cultivation methods for years finally spoke up at regional councils. On the military station Corvin 9, soldiers began questioning orders that didn't make tactical sense. It wasn't a violent revolution. It was millions of individual dragons making a choice. They chose change over tradition. They chose flexibility over rigidity. They chose to build something new. General Craven found his support crumbling within hours. The military forces he had counted on began standing down. Not because anyone fought them, but because the soldiers themselves started questioning why they were fighting. Young officers asked their commanders why they were taking orders from Craven instead of the elected council. When the commanders couldn't give good answers beyond tradition and proper authority, the soldiers simply stopped following them. Within 2 days, the coup had collapsed without a single shot being fired. Craven surrendered, looking confused and defeated. He had prepared for a military battle. He had never imagined losing a battle of ideas. The Dragon Council reconvened with a new mandate from their citizens. The vote was overwhelming. The Empire would transform. Not overnight, and not easily, but they would begin the long process of change. Tyler became the first counselor of what they renamed the Dragon Commonwealth. It wasn't an emperor position. He was one voice among many, with the specific role of advocating for perspectives that might otherwise be ignored. He helped them redesign their systems to be more flexible. He trained leaders in what humans had learned about inclusive design and adaptive structures. He showed them how to create space for different types of minds and different approaches to problems. Scholar Torin became his closest friend and collaborator. Together, they studied ancient dragon texts and human social sciences, finding ways to blend the best of both civilizations. Lissa, the young dragon who had hidden her left-handedness, became an advocate for dragons who had been suppressing parts of themselves to fit in. Even Virex, the skeptical red dragon, eventually became one of Tyler's strongest supporters after seeing how the changes improved efficiency and innovation across the Empire. The transformation wasn't perfect. There was resistance. There were setbacks. Some dragons never accepted the new ways. But slowly, year by year, the Commonwealth became a place where different types of dragons could thrive. Where questions were encouraged rather than punished. Where hierarchy served function instead of tradition. Where being different was seen as valuable rather than defective. Tyler lived among the dragons for the rest of his human life. He aged while they remained young, his hair turning gray while his dragon friends barely changed. But in those decades, he helped reshape a civilization that had been stuck for 1,000 years. When Tyler finally died at 82 years old, surrounded by friends who had become his true family, the Commonwealth held a day of mourning across all 47 systems. They built a monument with an inscription in both dragon script and English: "The boy who taught us that strength comes in many forms, and the measure of a civilization is how it treats those who are different." The Oracle Stone was placed in a museum with a new plaque explaining its true purpose. It hadn't been searching for the perfect leader. It had been searching for the catalyst that could spark evolution. For someone who could show the dragons what they had forgotten and help them become what they were always meant to be. And in the centuries after Tyler's death, when young dragons asked how their Commonwealth came to be so different from other empires, elders would tell them the story of the mysterious human boy who failed every test but somehow taught an entire civilization how to change. Because sometimes the most valuable thing isn't fitting in. It's showing everyone else that there are different ways to be strong, different ways to lead, and different ways to build a world where everyone can belong.